Hi guys, Brian Latimer, FLW Tour Pro here. Today we're going to talk about what I think is one of the best cold water, clear water fishing baits there is, especially during the winter time of the year. It's called the Blade Runner. You guys might be familiar with the term underspin, but I'm going to show you what my favorite plastics are, the best sizes, and where I like to fish this bait to catch some of the biggest bass of the year. The underspin. You guys may be familiar with this bait. If you're not from my region of the country, you're probably a little unfamiliar with it. But I'll walk you through what it is. Basically, this is just a jig head, nothing more than a jig head. This is a pony style underspin. Has just a spinnerbait blade on the bottom side of it. And that does a couple things that we'll talk about a little bit later. So it's nothing more than a jig head with a spinner on the bottom. Typically, your spinner is going to come out the top like a spinnerbait. But on an underspin, the namesake of the bait, the spinner is under the bait. And also you're going to have a soft plastic. So a lot of times we'll use just a straight fluke style bait. In particular, I like the Z-Man Streaks. And also I'll use this as a 3-inch diesel minnow. This works really well too. It has a little boot tail on the back of it. Now this is a really simple setup, and there's a couple questions that you need to ask yourself before you pick your trailer, your particular plastic that you want to use on this bait. When I'm fishing a little bit shallower water or a little darker water, I typically like to use a boot tail plastic on it. That does a couple things. That boot tail gives the bait a little bit more lift and lets the bait fall a little slower. So when bottom contact is not really an issue, and I'm not having to get the bait out on a long cast to keep it down on the bottom, I'll use a boot tail swim bait. Like I said, this is a 3-inch diesel minnow. It's hard to beat this bait. The profile is almost identical to the shad profile during the winter time of the year. And it comes in really good colors. This particular color is called Morning Night. And you can see it has just a little flake in it. And it has that pearlescent back on it. It's a little bit translucent against the sunlight, because I'm typically going to be using this bait in clear water, so that's just a really good color to use in clear water situations. So I'll use a boot tail when I'm fishing in very clear water. Now if I'm fishing trying to really deep, trying to keep that bait on the bottom, or if the fish just seem to be a little bit more on the particular side of that particular trip, I want to use the 3.75 Streaks, and that bait is a little bit more finessey in my mind. Has a straight tail on it. There's no water displacement factor at all from the plastic, but you still get that really good profile of a small shad, a threadfin shad, or whatever the shad species may be for your particular waterway. And it works really good. That bait, coupled with a pony head style Blade Runner, works phenomenal. It keeps the bait on the bottom, and a lot of times bottom contact is key when fishing this bait. So those are really the two major soft plastics that I use when I'm out there using an underspin. You know, talking about colors, my colors are very simple. I'm either going to use a white, just a pearl color is a very good color, works in all different color situations. This particular color is called Morning Night. It's a little translucent belly. There's a little bit of flake in the belly of it with that good pearlescent back on it. It really resembles a shad really well. Those colors look really good. As long as you stay in that shad category, you're going to be just fine on colors. I don't really typically like to branch out far from those shad colors when I'm picking my soft plastic colors for my underspins. So just like any other soft plastic, I'm going to pick my color sources from the forage base. If the forage base is brim, I'm going to pick those greens, oranges, and browns. In this particular instance, it's going to be shad, threadfin shad, blueback herring. So I'm going to stay in that shad color range. So
still a good one.
That's how I determine what colors I'm going to be using. As long as I stay in the pocket. Color is typically not what's getting you the bite. In this particular presentation, it's more the way you present the bait and the profile of the bait trumps every color. So where I'm going to be fishing this bait can be a wide range of different places, because this is a sinking bait, of course, since it's on a jig head, and it really works well on suspended bass because the bait flutters. Now I talked a little bit about the blade and the blade being under the bait, and that gives you so much more control over this bait will track. If I let this bait down to 10 or 15, 20 foot, when I start to reel it back, it's not gonna, with that spinner being on the bottom side of the bait, it doesn't tend to track up. A lot of baits that you'll throw out and wind, when you start to wind them back to the boat, they have a tendency to lift up the water column. Well, understand one of the best things about it, when you let it down to 10, 12, 15, 20 foot deep, that bait will track pretty much at the same depth better than just a plain swim bait. That's one of the advantages of fishing the underspin. The other thing is that gives you a little flash, you know, that gives you a flash in somewhere that you really normally wouldn't see flash on the underside of the bait. That gives you some drawing power in clear water. Most of the time our fish are feeding off of sight. And a lot of times, especially in clear water, the water is going to still be darker. There's not as much light penetration when we're fishing deeper. So having drawing power is very important, especially when you're fishing a bait with small profile. You still need that drawing power. You need that fish to be able to pick that bait up from a long, far away so you can draw the fish to it and get the strike. So that gives us a little bit of drawing power. The other thing is the blade makes the bait sink slower. So I can throw this bait out and not touch it, and it will just sink and do all the work for me. The blade's still rotating, creating that drawing power, creating that flash, and it sinks slowly. It's more lifelike. It doesn't just plummet to the bottom. The bait literally just kind of glides and cascades through a school of fish, through a school of bait, and that can be some of the most effective ways to fish an underspin is by doing nothing, actually throwing it out over a ditch, over a timber line, through a school of actively feeding fish and letting that bait flutter down is one of the most effective ways to fish it. And having that spinner under it allows you to control the bait better than it does any other bait out there when you're trying to fish the bottom or let that bait cascade through a school of fish. So that's some of the magic and why underspins work really well during the winter time of the year. They work any time of the year, but specifically during the winter time of the year, it can be a very hard bait to beat during this time. So, you know, how we're going to fish this bait, it can range a couple of different ways. You know, I can do just as I just mentioned. We can throw it out through a school of fish and let that bait just flutter down. And we fish a lot of what we call ditches here in South Carolina. Ditches are nothing more than creek turns somewhere where the water is a little bit deeper in the center than it is on the side. That's all a ditch is. It's nothing really fancy. It's nothing that you really need a graph to find out. A lot of times those ditches and creeks and coves, they come out and they meet a main river channel, a main creek channel. Anytime when those two channels intersect, where you have a little bit shallow water on the sides and the shelves and deeper water in the center, those are great places to fish an underspin. And you're basically you're gonna really start to locate on your graph or your electronics where those fish are located in the water column. A lot of times our fish suspend when they're actively feeding. They'll work their way up through the water column and they're actively feeding. We can use that bait to throw out and just let it cascade through that school of fish. Another way, especially when we're really getting to the winter months of the year and the water temperatures really starts to get in those 40s, the lower 40s, mid 40s, our fish are kind of glued to the bottom. And one of the best ways to fish that bait is to throw it out, let it sink all the way to the bottom and just crawl it. Just crawl it on the bottom, and what happens is that bait will just pull off the bottom. It'll lift, and you'll stop it and it'll plummet right back. And our fish are glued to the bottom during the winter time because they'll just lay their bellies on the bottom, and that's the way they stay warm. A lot of times the bottom of the lake is 1 degree, 2 degrees warmer than the actual water temperature, and they'll just sit right there on the bottom, and that's a great way to draw a strike. You know, as far as sizes, I like to use as small as a blade runner as I can. The reason being is the smaller weight you use, the more lifelike action you get out of the bait. This bait really flutters really well, and it's a finesse style presentation. Oftentimes I'm going to use it on bait casting equipment, but it's not a power fishing technique. I'm going to use it on 10 or 12 pound test line. That allows me to keep that bait on the bottom a little bit better. But casting equipment just seems to have a better feel bringing it back to the boat. You don't want to use a lot of rod tip manipulation with this bait. I just like to get all the action out of the reel actually. So when I reel it off the bottom, that bait will lift just a little bit, and I'll stop it and it'll fall back to the bottom. And that flutter back down to the bottom is oftentimes when I get the strike. So that's my setup when I'm using it out there. Is I'm going to use bait casting equipment, 10 or 12 pound test line, 7 foot to 7'6" medium heavy action rod. Since you're using a light line, you definitely want some rod with a little bit of tip in it. That lets that fish get the bait a little bit better as well. But I don't overdo it when I'm actually out there working the bait. I really just let the reel do all of the action for me. Less is more when you're out there using your underspin, so do not work it, do not overwork the bait. The best way to do it is let your reel do all the action for you and let the bait do the work. So sometimes you're gonna have to use a 1/2 ounce or 3/4 ounce just to keep bottom contact, because sometimes bottom contact is key when fishing this bait. So if you can, use as light as possible. That'll let you present the bait in an efficient manner. If you get out there and it's very windy, switch to a 1/2 ounce, 3/4 ounce. But the lighter, the better. When you're using your underspins, you're gonna get a lot more bites. I typically like bait casting equipment when I'm using this particular bait. Even though I'm using bait casting equipment, this is not a power fishing technique. This is a very finesse, very precise style of fishing. So I'm going to use a lot lighter bait casting equipment. I'm going to use 10 or 12 pound test fluorocarbon line. A lot of times the bites are very subtle, so fluorocarbon is more sensitive, and you'll pick up some of those lighter bites when your bait's fluttering down to the bottom. I also like a 7 foot to 7'6" size medium heavy or medium action rod, something with a little tip in it. You don't want a really strong tip using this light line. And I really let my reel do most of the work, the reel and rod. When I'm using bait casting equipment, you don't shake the tip as much as when you use spinning equipment. You just have a natural reaction to shake the tip a little bit more with spinning equipment, I feel like. So bait casting equipment works well because you're going to let the bait do the work. I use all my reel, don't really move the tip a lot, not a lot of rod manipulation. I can get everything I need to get out of this bait by just starting and stopping the reel. So a lot of times the bites are going to come when this bait is starting to flutter down to the bottom, so keep that in mind. Don't overwork the bait. Let the spinner, let the soft plastic you use doing the work, and you're going to get a lot more bites. Underspinners are a great way for you guys to get out there and catch some of these wintertime bass or to feed them very, very small shad. So I'd encourage you to get out there, learn to bait, experiment with some different plastics. Remember, never overwork the bait. Use as light of a jig head as you can and maintain bottom contact. And always pay attention to your electronics. Your electronics are going to show you where the fish are, and they don't lie. They're going to show you exactly where the forage is. And if you pay attention to those three aspects of this particular technique, you guys are going to catch a lot of fish, and you're going to be enjoying your wintertime fishing.